our guest speaker. We have Doug Harris. Doug is the CEO at Kaleidoscope Group, and for almost 30 years, his firm has helped clients create customized strategies to address their specific diversity needs. So today, Doug will share some of his expertise around developing diversity programs. We also have Tony Dolliger from Analytics 8. So Tony is a principal consultant here at Analytics 8, and he has extensive resume of client work across a variety of industries, has a passion for all things data. So Tony is going to talk to us about how to use data and analytics to support the diversity programs that Doug is talking about. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn the presentation over to Doug, who will get us started.
Thank you, Tracy. Good day, everyone. Very excited to be a part of this webinar around how do we really look at diversity and inclusion programs, but look at it with a strong data lens as it relates to making it effective. Again, I've been doing this work for over 30 years, and in that time, you see a lot of programs, and one of the things I believe that's important for these programs to be implemented and be seen to be impactful is the data that happens around them. I think you can create better programs as you start with better data in the beginning. So I'm again going to be the generalist here, talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and then supporting Tony as we dig into it a little bit more around the measures to drive that change. So a little bit about our company, Kaleidoscope Group. We're full service diversity, equity, and inclusion, certified minority-owned business, led by myself, who again, 2 weeks ago, I celebrated my 31st year in this work. We've been doing this for over 30 years. We have, this is our only expertise, so there's no other component to our organization. We focus in this space, and we successfully guided over 800 clients across the world. We have 40 staff, 25 associates, and then 35 international facilitators driving our work in specialty niche practice areas to realize the work that is needed. And then the next slide is just a picture of my team. And they are all very happy based on great leadership. That's a joke. I know you can't laugh at it, but that's okay. But we are located all throughout the country. Even though we're headquartered in Chicago, there's about 15 or so of us here. Others are all throughout the country. And again, we have a global team across the world that supports what we do. And we attempt to live up to that which we speak to. You can see some of the diversity here, but we range in age from, I think, 21 to 73. So we have a very diverse team there. Now, when we do our work, and when we talk about the term full service, what do we mean? Well, there's 5 areas of focus for diversity, equity, and inclusion work: workforce, workplace, marketplace, community, and supply. And so today we'll be focusing on those top 2 barriers or top 2 areas of focus, being workforce, and the outcome we're looking for from a diversity standpoint is a workforce with the best talent that comes from all backgrounds. And that leads to quality solutions. There's many studies out there around when you bring different people together, they have healthy interaction, the quality solutions that you come up with are unbelievable. Some people look at the topic and they believe that, okay, it's just about talent, don't care what your background is, but those backgrounds make a difference in coming up with more holistic ideas. And then in the workplace area, how do we create an inclusive work environment that values and leverages all of our differences? And that leads to performance and innovation. So after 30 years, when we first started, we were only in that diversity outcome place, but we're now moving into that business outcome place. And then the next slide talks about the journey that you need to go to get to that change. So what is that systemic journey? A lot of organizations offer solutions. We offer change, and change is so crucial. So you're coming in at one place, not just learning something new, but leaving in another place. So that begins with the vision of success, assessment, and your strategy. Then how do we communicate this, educate people, implement that strategy, create accountability for it, and then measure and monitor progress. And when you begin that vision of what you want to achieve, that aligns everyone on the same page. Now, once you get to the assessment, what you assess and what you find out really helps to get you to a powerful strategy for change. And that's the connection we're making today, is how do we look at the data and get the right data so you can come up with the strategy that leads to the change. And so the next slide just quickly talks about, moving to change is data, analysis of that data, strategy, results, and then impact. We look at results as, okay, we increased our women representation by 20%. But the impact is, how did that make us a better organization? So we've been celebrating results, which are important, but you get the impact. And again, the better the data you have, the more powerful or capable you are to getting the impact. And then the next slide just talks about what are some of those things that we are looking to assess. So what are the beliefs, behaviors, policy, processes, and practices? And so oftentimes in our work, we think we're just talking about behaviors, but we really got to look at everything that's going on to get the right data to make a difference. Right data to make a difference. And again, that's the hope, that we'll be sharing some things today that bring that to light for you. Now, the next slide really gets into when we're in this space of talent. Most organizations come to me and say, hey, can you help me find some different people? We're missing out on diversity. Help me hire some different people. But the complete employee life cycle is where you really create change. And Tony's going to be sharing things around that go beyond your typical what you don't have, but what are those things that are stopping you from getting? So you got hiring, then you bring them on board, you got to develop them. Then after developing, you got to leverage them, maximize their performance, and then hopefully retain them. And retention, we want committed, loyal retention. And so as you assess and come up with information, it can help you see how you're doing in all of these different areas. And then the last slide I'll share to kind of set up this discussion for the day. Having been in this business as long as I have, and it's like, what really helps organizations to be effective? When I first started, there was, I think, 10 companies in the country doing diversity, equity, inclusion work. And there's over 500 doing this work today. And about 100 joined in the last 5 months based on what's going on out here in our society. But how do you get to long-term change? A real difference. You have leadership commitment, wide involvement from many, conscious inclusionary behaviors, a sustainable infrastructure to drive that success. It has to be connected to business. You have to have real honest and open conversations. And that systemic approach, which is crucial, a holistic systemic approach, which is driven by data. We got to go through the change, but it's driven by the right data to get there. We'll be sharing some of that today. So I'm excited to be with Tony, and I'm going to pass it on to Tony to kind of start this off. I'm going to go off camera, so you'll have Tony all by himself, but I have not left you. I'll be here, and if I feel like saying something, I'm going to ask Tony to let me slip in here. So enjoy it. Go ahead, Tony, do your thing, and we'll talk again a little bit later.
Very good. Thanks, Doug. So like Doug said, today we really want to focus on some practical examples that you can tackle when it comes to your HR data, and particularly looking at workplace diversity and inclusion when it comes to the areas of workforce and workplace analytics. So like Tracy said, I'm a part of Analytics 8. So we are a consultancy, a data and analytics consultancy that helps companies translate their data into meaningful and actionable information. And what that means basically is we help from all the way to data strategy, to implementation, to analysis, to help companies really bring their data to life. And one of the ways that I get to do that on a regular basis is with people analytics data or HR data, and focusing on the workplace diversity and inclusion metrics. So like I said, I want to take you through really practical examples today that go through the entire employee life cycle that Doug mentioned. And hopefully you'll have some new ideas of things that you can tackle within your organization. So let's start by looking at hiring analytics. So recruitment is one of the areas that Doug talked about. And one of the ways that you can measure success in this area is by looking at your candidate pipeline and understanding if there are bottlenecks in your process where diverse candidates are falling out of the pipeline. So one of the ways that you can do this is by baselining all of your metrics across your pipeline categories or stages by the total number of applicants, and then have your numerator be the number of applicants that reach that stage. And the goal of this, again, is to see how flat of a trajectory it is through your pipeline in terms of diverse representation. And what you'll want to look for are drop-offs, and seeing, for example, if for this in this chart, if you have 19% of total candidates that self-identify from a different race or ethnicity than just Caucasian, then if you see a drop-off like that from 19 to 10% between interview and offer, you might be led to look at your interviewing process to understand if there are biases in your interviewing process today. Another example is looking at what are your typical candidate sources, and then actually breaking that out based on, again, that self-identification of race or ethnicity or gender as well, and trying to identify where you can maximize your spend so that your cost per hire is efficient while you're still making sure that you have the most diverse workforce that you can achieve. And so, again, looking at this chart, this is a tree map, but showing, if you were to demonstrate those of your hires that self-identify from majority background are coming from college and university, where more of your diverse hires are coming from majority social media, you might have a different approach in terms of where you focus marketing and how you're going to spend money to make sure that you're sourcing candidates and identifying the biases in sorting. So if most of your money today is going towards university hiring and you're not seeing diverse representation in your candidates, then it's time to look at potentially different sources and how you can diversify your candidate sources for the sake of diversifying your candidate pipeline as well. The next area to look at is what level of experience you're bringing employees into the organization. So again, it's not saying that it's any better or worse to be only bringing in people at an executive level or only bringing people at entry level, but you want the data to be telling the truth about what is happening in your organization. So if you're only bringing in people, diverse candidates at an entry level, is that an issue if they're not being brought on as experienced or executive hires, or vice versa, right? Are you not giving people chances either in experienced positions or in entry-level positions, and being able to measure that? And what you'll see here in this chart, sometimes when you're looking at bar graphs on the left just in terms of raw numbers, it's helpful to see it in terms of a percentage of total to get a better idea of the representation in those different stages. So maybe it's not immediately obvious here when you look at it as just a raw count, but when you do it as a 100% chart, basically by normalizing each of those buckets, you can see that you have less representation in your experience bucket than your entry bucket for your hires. And just going one level deeper in that, you can look at it by job level. If your organization is hierarchical and you have a lot of different job levels, you can do the same thing with this. It's the same type of analysis, same type of chart. But depending on what data you have available to you, you can do this sort of analysis and understand what's going on better in terms of how whether or not people are being brought in with equal opportunity and equal pay at entry points. And then the other thing is to make sure that you're looking across your different business areas to see that there's diverse representation across the business. So, if you just look at it at the high level, maybe you say, great, we're doing a great job. You know, but as you drill down into the details, right, sometimes the devil's in the details, and you understand if you have certain areas where you're still seeing resistance in your organization to focusing on having a diverse and inclusive workforce for that. Some other ideas to look at for hiring analytics here is just to see if there's a difference in the pay grade or band adherence that you have for your new hires. So basically, how are you paying them? And within your pay bands, is there any discrepancy within your pay bands even in terms of how much folks are being compensated based on their experience levels? Looking at the candidate pipelines, just again, based on the demographics of the surrounding area of your office locations. So are you actually meeting the minimum standard, right, of just is your candidate pipeline representative of the area of your actual job rec and where that's located? And then the next thing, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but breaking it down by cohorts to understand whether or not you're improving over time. So it's a journey, and we want to make sure that you're showing incremental improvements over time to be able to demonstrate your commitment. And one of the ways you can do that is by chopping up your recruitment pipeline into cohorts, like the class of 2018, 2019, 2020. How are we doing for those groups versus maybe historically where it was less of a commitment? And that can be a motivating thing to show incremental improvement over time for the organization, that, hey, we're actually achieving this, and it's what we're doing is working. And if you just stay zoomed out, you don't look at those particular areas broken down by cohorts, it can be defeating to show the really slow growth over time. Doug, anything to add there for hiring analytics before I jump into development?
Yeah, well, one of the things, Tony, in our work, people will see their experience as the organization's experience. And if you don't have this data, you'll think what you're dealing with, everyone is dealing with. And sometimes that's the case, sometimes that's not. So I love the way you approach it. So there's solid data that can have solid answers. And so people then begin to say, at my company, this is this and this is that. Not really. You know, there's different things taking place. Let's get that right look so we can move forward in the right way. Yeah.
Yeah. So like Doug said, the next area that we'll dig into here is just around development and advancement. So really, when we're looking at analytics for this, we're trying to look at how are employees promoted in your organization? How are they being developed over time? And is there any discrepancies in terms of majority and non-majority employees in terms of how that process is playing out? So we'll just go through some examples again here. So simple analysis here, just looking at promotion rates. So based on how long you're in a particular job role, how long does it take for somebody to advance out of that job role? So this is like very drilled down now, right? You can look at this at a higher level and say, you know, at a department level or a division level, how long are folks in particular job roles? But sometimes it helps to get down into the details here too. And so again, if you look at this just based on the raw numbers, showing how long it takes for folks to be able to advance, typically from their position currently to the next level up. And one of the things, again, that can be helpful is just to look at it as a percentage of total. So you're understanding the impact of that. And these two charts are basically saying the same thing, right? Because the actual standard is still the same. It's percent of total employees or percent or the actual raw count. So instead of doing just by percent, one of the things that I like to do then is to look at the actual rolling percent. Because this is, again, is giving you an idea in terms of the percent of total as you move forward. So the idea is saying how many people were promoted 3 years or less, or 2 years or less than 1 year. And this gives you an understanding of, at some point, all of these employees are advancing in terms of the folks you're looking at that were promoted, but you can see the discrepancy in how much slower that curve is for diverse employees in your organization. And again, that can be indicative of a problem. And again, when I was talking about cohorts earlier, this is an example of how you can break it down into cohorts. So if you're looking at, say, the class of 2018, and you're saying, how are they doing compared to how we've been doing historically? And it gives you a snapshot to say, okay, so if we're looking at the last 3 years, we go back to 2018, how is advancement playing out with that class of employees? And are we doing a better job now, basically, now that we've identified this problem? how are we progressing? And again, just even breaking it down as simple as year of hire, right? Especially if you have seasonality, right? You could even bucket it differently. If you have like a summer hiring process, you could say summer of 2018 or whatever. You can be very granular with this, but at the end of the day, it's you're demonstrating improvement, which can be helpful for folks to know that you're making progress. The next area is around compensation, right? So equal pay for equal performance. Doug, do you have something you want to jump in there and say?
Yeah, it's just real quickly, in this area here, one of the concerns we often hear in our work is that we have to work harder, we have to prove ourselves more to be effective. So many times people who are different will get a lot of interim positions. Why don't you just give them the job? Nope, not yet. They're not ready. It's an interim position. And these numbers like this will show it took their colleague 2 years, them 4 years, because there's biases at play behind this. And this is the kind of data that can give you the real insight around that so you can look into what's going on to come up with a better look at the organization. Yeah?
Yeah. Yeah, and the same is true for compensation then as well. So again, equal pay for equal performance for equal job roles. This goes, we'll see this actually, this sort of a chart looking at Cohen's D with gender pay also, because you're isolating on a particular variable. But the idea is showing if the curve is distributed slightly to the right, you're showing that people, if you basically hold those two metrics and you look at one variable in the middle in terms of diversity, whatever you're trying to analyze for that, how does that move the curve, right? If it moves the curve to the right and it's a significant move to the right, then you have issues and discrepancies there that need to be addressed when it comes to equal pay. And this sort of a chart can be helpful to demonstrate that shift. Similarly, when we talk about succession pipelines, so for key roles in the organization, you've got 2 or 3 people on deck that are being groomed or prepared to take on that leadership role. Excuse me. The question here is, what percentage of those pipelines are majority employees versus employees that have diverse backgrounds and diversity when it comes to race and ethnicity and gender, and even just overlaying this and showing where you have gaps. So you might be really solid at the C level, but things start to break down the farther down you go in your organization, and especially when you see a big dive in L4, it's something you want to look at again and understand, why is this the case, right? Is it because it goes back to the fact that we haven't been sourcing candidates and haven't been hiring for this, or are there actually larger issues in our organization in terms of advancement when we talk about succession pipelines? Because if you're grooming folks for these positions of leadership and employees are not given opportunities to be part of those grooming processes and succession pipelines, then you're not going to see the advancement and diversity all the way up to the top levels of your organization. And again, talking about advancement again, one of the ways that you can measure employee engagement is by looking at your learning activities and how engaged folks are with learning and what your spend is per employee for learning. So if you're just looking at spend by employee, again, if you see a big dip like we see in this chart, this is actually showing the opposite, right? You're spending more money on diverse employees, which is great here in terms of development. But the idea is, again, you're looking at this and trying to understand, what is my data telling me about the efforts we're making for this? And again, if you were to automate this chart and present it to your organization, you show we care about diversity and inclusion at all levels of our organization so much, we're investing this much per employee on employee education to help prepare employees for the positions that they're going to be suited for in the future, right? And the idea there is to say, where are there differences to tell that story? And you just want to tell the truth on that. Whatever's going on, let's tell the truth about it and use data to be able to demonstrate that.
One of the big pushes today, there's 2 of them. One, what are the influential development opportunities? So one of my clients, for example, had a Harvard leadership program, and everybody who went to that program got promoted. But there were no different people being invited to that program. And so this process impacts what are the learning experience that have the most influence of development. And then the other thing we're dealing with today is a lot of these development programs have to be targeted towards people. So there'll be women who say, look, I want to go to this women leadership conference. Why you got to go to a women leadership conference? Why can't you just go to a regular leadership conference? Well, there's more that can be gained from the women leadership conference in regards to what they may need. So this development piece is so crucial, and we have to find ways to develop which are uniquely impactful for the people that's being developed. So this is real crucial to understand how that's lining up from a resource and both from a type standpoint around what happens.
The last area, second to last area we're going to look at is leveraging and performance analytics. So there's two different things that I think are helpful to look at here with this area. So again, we're looking for bias again. So if you're looking at your performance scoring pre and post calibration and understanding how you're normalizing that curve to make sure that your crazy raters are bounded. One of the things you can do with your data in this is look at it broken down by race, ethnicity, or gender, and try to identify behaviors of raters actually pre and post calibration. So again, if you're seeing a big spike where you're seeing more employees are rated highly pre-calibration that are majority employees, again, it just calls into question and maybe demonstrates an issue that is existing that maybe is being addressed through calibration. But again, it's kind of another way to look at attitudes in the organization and biases that are occurring. And even though you have processes to be able to handle that, it might call out some of those areas where folks still have biases, especially as you drill down into different areas of the organization and understand that pre and post calibration analysis.
Yeah. One of the sides of this, Tony, which is very interesting, is in order to move this work forward, you have to have real conversation with your employees. And many times we have much more real conversation with those who we're comfortable with. And so one of my clients, this guy came up, they had a whole crew of people who were getting outstanding ratings but never promoted. They're like, why do we get these outstanding ratings but never promoted? But the company was like, I don't want to tell them they're not doing well. Just give them good ratings. Like, are you going to promote them? No. But they all had 5 ratings on the 1 to 5 scale. So there's a lot of honesty. These ratings need to, it's a good piece of data to have to correlate. How does that connect to their career? And sometimes it does, sometimes it does not. And so other times it's like they get lower ratings as a trend. Why is that as well? A lot can be uncovered here to make your organization equitable.
Yeah. Yeah, the data is showing just a part of the story, right? All data is a representation of the facts. It's a representation of the facts. It's always a partial representation of the facts. And so it's helpful, though, information to be able to pair up with your intuitive thinking and some of the qualitative data in your organization, not just quantitative data. But again, it's telling a story, and you have to dig into it to understand more context to make sure you understand what's going on in your organization for that. Next chart we're going to look at here, bar charts. Basically looking at, are you incorporating qualitative and quantitative metrics in your performance ratings? So not just communication skills, negotiation, growth objectives, right? But looking at bringing in data from outside of just HR and understanding how are people performing to the targets that they have, their business targets in the organization. So again, this can identify a gap potentially if you see where performance in HR and performance in your business metrics aren't lined up based on any different sort of attributes that we're looking at here for diversity and inclusion. Again, it just brings up the question of why is that the case? If they're crushing their sales number but are getting lower scores on HR ratings or on soft skills ratings or whatever, right? It's just an idea of looking at the biases that you have in your measurement processes again for that. Then the last area that I want to walk through today with some examples of analysis that you can do is around retention. And again, retention is one of those indicators that you have diversity or an inclusion problem in your organization, right? If you can bring folks in and 6 months later they're walking back out the door, and there's something common about all those employees that are leaving constantly, right? They all have the same manager, they're all in the same department. The idea there is to say what's going on, right? So retention issues can be an indicator of, again, resistance in your organization when it comes to diversity and inclusion. So just look at retention numbers. Basically, you want to say, of this group of people that were here at this point in time, how many are still here today? And one of the ways that we like to look at this is based on performance. So are you keeping your high performers, and are you counseling out those who are on lower performance scores? And understanding, is there any difference between majority employees or diverse employees when it comes to this? Are you having retention issues and keeping your high performers? Or, like Doug said, are you having issues with truth telling in terms of keeping folks around who maybe aren't in the best role that's fit for what they're supposed to be doing right now? And so the idea here is just to say, again, what's happening in our organization. And this is one interesting way that folks can look at retention metrics and can tell about the health of an organization, of how well you retain quality talent and how you're positioning those that need to improve to get to that improvement.
Yeah, one of the things I'm often asked to do, Tony, is sit in on succession planning sessions around who's ready for higher levels. And so different candidates would pop up and organizations will talk about them. And so one candidate would pop up and they'll say, yeah, they're having some problems, but I'm gonna work with them and see if I can get them ahead. Then another candidate will pop up, say, they're having some problems, I'm gonna watch them. I'm like, well, why are you working with them and watching them? So a lot of your enhancement of performance is based on how you're sponsored and how you're treated. And this kind of data will give you, like, where are these pockets, so we can look underneath it, like you say, and analyze what's being said and what's behind it. So there's so many different things, but if you don't have that data, they'll just make up their own facts around what's going on. This gives the real facts for us to look into in a more thorough way.
Yeah. The next area to look at then, or the last chart that we'll be talking about today, I'm encouraging you to look at exit survey data and company review data. So exit survey data is what folks tell you when they're leaving an organization. Not always the most reliable. People are either very emotional one way, or they're, not wanting to be confrontational on their way out for the sake of not burning a bridge. It's just one part of the data, right? But you combine that with company review data that comes externally. You can't tie that to necessarily a person to say, was this person diverse? Were they part of the majority? But it gives you an indication of, like, percentage of the reviews we're getting that are positive versus negative, and understanding what the potential was, the potential issues you have in your organization. And again, when you're looking at exit survey data, just look at the scores based on the questions themselves and identify where you have a big gap and you break it down based on race, ethnicity, gender, and try to identify if there's any discrepancies in those questions. And again, it could be an issue with the way you're asking the question in terms of the answers that folks are giving. Or again, it could be indicative to you of an issue that needs to be addressed. And again, it's looking through that entire employee life cycle to identify where those pain points are and try to address those, right? And just understanding, again, the data is not going to tell the whole story every time, but it gives you that indication of where there may be a pain point that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, I love what you shared there, Tony, because sometimes we'll say exit survey like it's a consistent process, but it's, like you said, how you ask the question and who asked the question and the process in which they ask it, because this could be great information you get from that. If not done well, it'll just be like you said, I'm not going to burn my bridge, and we just say things. But how do we do this? And, the mindset in which we set it up. I've seen people like, why'd you leave? Let's have a survey, versus like, we want to improve our company. We want to, if there's things we're not doing, please give us some guidance. So even the way you set this up can be real impactful as it relates to the change. And so again, the combination of the views in which we're bringing to the webinar is doing the right thing, having the right data, but having the competence to correct it appropriately to end up in a better place. Yeah.
Yeah.
I need to hang out with you more, Tony. I might be smart if I had this data.
Same here with you.
Yes, sir.
So a lot of times we get the question then of, okay, I want to do this. How do I get started, right? And what I want to encourage folks today is think big, but start small, right? So the idea here is you're not going to solve all of your data problems all at once. You're not going to solve all of your diversity and inclusion problems all at once. But the idea is how do you get started, right? And so specifically with data, when we're looking at data, there's some things you can do to get on the roadmap to be able to automate some of these metrics and these charts so that you can share this information with your company and understand, again, put it in the hands of decision makers and influencers in your organization so that people know what's going on when it comes to data. And if you build out automated dashboards, it's hard for you to cherry pick stuff out of PowerPoint decks in terms of what you think is positive messaging. You show the good, the bad, and the ugly, and how do we improve together? So some ways to get started here, right? Start by just collecting data in your organization, right? A lot of times HR is kind of left on their own to figure out what they're going to be doing. You know, the world of Excel documents, tools have matured greatly to allow folks to be able to do their own data analysis. So collect that data to start with, right? And then we find a ton of value in organizing that data, again, because that allows you to be able to do the next thing, which is to automate and to reduce the amount of time it takes to prepare these sorts of metrics, right? You want this to be as automated as possible, again, so you remove bias even in your data presentation processes and your data collection processes. And then analyze the data, look at it, understand trends, apply advanced analysis to it to understand how you should be chopping it up and ways you should be visualizing it to communicate what's going on. The fifth area is to democratize it, which means get it out of HR. So companies are very cautious about this, obviously, because of personal information and everything, but there are ways you can share this data outside of HR to encourage folks with momentum and things that are going well, and also identify areas of resistance that are still going on. Number 6 is to enhance your data. So bring in that external data sources from other parts of your organization, from external data sources. Like I said, you're looking at demographic data around your different locales and understanding what's going on. Enhance your data. Don't just make it just HR data, right? It should be, you need more context to tell the more of the story. And then number 7 and 8 kind of go together. Again, number 7 is to socialize it, get people talking about the data within your organization. And then number 8 is to share it and be willing to share it externally. I know I've been interested and encouraged when I see companies that release reports on gender pay differences or on diversity and inclusion successes or failures, frankly, and understanding ways that folks are making an effort in this area and trying to learn and grow from each other's experiences. So just encouraging you to share your data for that. These are great ways to kind of get started on this process when it comes to a data perspective.
Yeah, and what stands out as you're sharing, Tony, sometimes we would use data to give people a beating versus to help them grow. So if you're going to beat them with the data, they don't want to do the data, they don't want to tell you about the data, versus we want to use the data as a growth tool, and not just a correction tool. And so they want to do well, I think, and many times they're fearful if they're not. I'm going to be held accountable for that. Accountability is good, but how do we support them and enhance and socialize and get feedback from many different places? You know, sometimes when we socialize, we socialize with our cousins, you know, versus a broad section of the organization, because everyone's going to see it differently. But when you socialize it, it sends a message of commitment to change. You know, so they want to know. That's what if you want to know, there's a mindset that says, hey, now it can make that happen. Okay? Yeah. So good stuff here.
Doug, have you seen anything? I'm curious about this. Have you seen, so the reporting, like it's a lot of self-reporting, especially when folks are doing job applications. A lot of folks won't report race, ethnicity, or gender in their application processes. Do you think that that people will report or not report that on an application based on the company's reputation? Or what are some of the reasons why folks would or would not share that data? Because a lot of times we see that when we look at HR data, you see, male, female, and then 30% is other, right? And you go, and it's that they don't report, right? It's that they're saying, I don't want to share this information is yes. the actual tagline is, I choose to not disclose. So what are some of the reasons for that? And are there things that you can do as a company to potentially help folks feel safer to share that data with you?
That's a great question, Tony. We're dealing with a major trust issue across society now. And people don't believe data is going to be used in a helpful way. And so let me hide it and try to position myself in a way that I think is going to land me better. And so what you have to do to get genuine, real data is present yourself and back that up as far as using it in the appropriate manner. So I had one organization that had 3 people of color, and we did the survey, and it was 40% of the surveys were from people of color. And all the people who said something bad said they were a person of color. And it's whoa, what is that about? But a lot of things are going on now where the truth is becoming a scarce resource. So as you're saying, we have to create culture around appreciating the truth, using the truth to get better, and then letting people know this is going to help us be a better organization. And so one of my biggest objectives when I go into clients is to create a truthful environment. People want to tell the truth or not based on how well it's going to be utilized to make a difference.
Yeah.
Makes sense? It's very interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, we're happy to answer any other questions that you have. Certainly, you can post those in the chat right now. We're very, here we go. Perfect. Great timing, whoever submitted this. I'm just going to scan it first. Sorry, I don't want to just blindly read. Somebody's going to mess with me in the chat. So this person asks, I notice in most conversations, diversity is not inclusive of individuals living with disabilities. On a data standpoint, I realize this is much more difficult to measure, but do you have thoughts on how to measure and improve in this area?
Yeah, what has happened historically is in that area, the main focus has been inclusion and not as much around diversity. And that's unfortunate. I'm not saying that's correct, but the underrepresentation piece has not nearly been as big as once they get there, are they valued, are they leveraged, are they given an opportunity for promotion, things of that nature. So I have seen that data be used around their experience in the environment, not used as much. And again, some of that, there's so many types of disabilities or persons with challenges that even how do you break that down, is a challenge. But I think it's getting a lot more emphasis today than it did when I first started. And I think I've seen improvement on it. But we still got to do more analysis, get more information from them around what that would help or how they can help with insights to create a more fair and equitable environment for everyone. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then one of the things that's just so silly to me, but operationally, if somebody discloses that they have disabilities, you offer them, you hire them on day one, make sure that you're using your data to understand that you've made the adaptations necessary for that person to feel welcome on day one. So it's such a simple thing, but part of onboarding should be make sure that the desk is set up correctly and you have the different accommodations there so that they feel like they were heard and loved on day one, right? It's something simple, but I've heard of that too. It's there's a disconnect in our onboarding process. We don't realize they show up on day one and it's oh, we don't have any of the accommodations ready. That communicates something very negative to folks on day one when they're, you're not ready. It's kind of like not having your laptop when you start. If you're working like programming. You're like, what am I supposed to do? Like use my pencil, right? So it's like, that's another thing you can do, just operationally. Make sure that your pipelines are really smooth in your recruiting process and onboarding process so they're ready on day one.
And I think the other side of that too, Tony, is to make sure you involve them in that process.
Yeah.
I've seen organizations, someone come to work and they have all these different, boulders for them to stand on, thinking that's going to be helpful. Man, I don't need these boulders. Who told you to put these in?
Yeah.
So we try to help them in our way versus say, hey, look, we want you to be effective here. What resources, what things can we do to make your experience powerful? So make that an involved discussion versus one where people are assuming and then coming up with the wrong answers. Yeah.
That's really good. Yeah.
Oh, really good? Oh, man, Tony, that's the first time I heard that one.
It was a nice way of correcting me in that, making sure I was being very clear on what I was saying. So I appreciate that. That was a very nice way to say it.
No problem. We'll see, buddy.
Yeah. Here's a good one. So how can employees build trust with their coworkers, especially when an employee is afraid to speak up? So what are ways you can encourage folks to feel safe to speak up in their organization?
Yeah, it's tough, because people many times are not willing to speak up because they're uncertain of how it's going to be received. Now, the reality, if you don't speak up, ain't nothing going to change. So that's the dichotomy they are. So one of the foundations of that is courage. And a couple of things are very key here. When people speak up, oftentimes they want to get the answer they want versus the answer that they get. So when they speak up, they want you to love what they say. And that's not really the real world. So I often say you got to we have a truthful mouth, but we have lying ears. So we want to share the truth, but we don't want to hear the truth back. And so we have to be capable. And when we're speaking up to people, we want to speak up to them in a way that's helping them to grow.
Yeah.
Versus criticizing. I say, I don't believe in correction. I believe in growth.
Yeah.
So I can say, look, you don't listen to me in meetings. Or I can say, hey, Tony, I know you want to hear from everybody in the meeting, and that's important to you, but at times I think you're not getting the viewpoints of others. So if you really want to live up to that concept of hearing from everyone, you might want to do a little bit better job at this. So I'm helping you be better versus telling people you're bad. So I often tell people, I got enough of my own problems, bring some answers. You'll get more, you'll be on my calendar more. And so it's a two-way street around creating that. And then I think the other piece is real big here is that history. We have history of it not working out well. And that history puts us in a place, I ain't going to do it again. I ain't going to do it again. Get over that history. It's not easy. I know that. But the world needs your voice. The world needs your input. And so often when I'm doing my work, Tony, they'll say, Doug, I'm so glad you said that. I'm like, well, why didn't you say it? I ain't going to say it, but I'm glad you said it. Nah. We need you to say it if a difference is going to happen.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to ask you a technical question here that I don't know the answer to. We might need to follow up on it. But this person's working on a B Corp certification. What are some of the key diversity and inclusive factors that they should focus on first?
Yeah, no question. So you definitely better answer that one. I don't know what a B Corp is, so.
I don't either. Well, we can follow up. That person can send us an email, and we can follow up on that. I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah.
We're getting these on the spot, folks. It's good. Keep them coming. All right. I'm just scanning. I want to make sure nobody's messing with me. There's too many of my friends on the call right now.
I'm glad you don't know me, Tony.
This is a good question. So as a company that wants to diversify their employees, is consciously trying to hire women or people of color okay? Like, for example, is it okay through a hiring process to only look at qualified candidates that are women or people of color?
Yeah. So the first answer was yes. It is okay to be conscious around underrepresentation. The concept of looking at only candidates from certain backgrounds is a great ground for lawsuit, you know. So we have this term called reverse discrimination, where there's no such thing. Discrimination is discrimination. There's no such thing as reverse. You know, whoever experiences this is discrimination. But it is okay to focus on areas of underrepresentation. It's okay to say, look, we need to put more conscious effort to enhance our workforce. Now, the reasoning has to be crucial, because underneath that question, it's not that I just want different people, but I think I'm missing out on having the best talent when I have a large body of the world not being represented in my organization. So this work started from a regulatory standpoint, meeting quotas and guidelines. Now it's in a quality place. I want the viewpoints, not only the backgrounds and talents, but the experiences from everywhere to drive the highest level of results. And it's okay to be conscious of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's okay to be conscious of that.
It's a good distinction. It's helpful.
Yeah.
We have time for a couple more. So if anybody else wants to put them in the chat, we can go through them. There's still some we're sitting here on. But what are your thoughts, Doug, when it comes to comparing an organization's demographics versus what's common in the industry or the geography where the company is based? So I mentioned an idea of doing that, but in terms of expectation setting or using that, it's kind of like what are you using that for? But basically, what are your thoughts on that in terms of incorporating other demographic or other information externally to be able to baseline your performance versus what's common, right? And understanding that as a baseline. Is that appropriate? Is that okay? Or do you have thoughts on that where there's a gray area?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that we have to consider is available workforce. You know, so I had one company say we want, 50% African-American engineers. I'm like, yeah, okay. Sounds good. But that's not, now you want to move from the 1% you got, but you got to look at the real world. And that's both available talent for that background. It's also a concrete, though, profile of success. So many organizations create profiles of success that make it hard for people to ever meet it. And some of these profiles have been set from 20 years ago. You got to live in 4 different cities. Why? Because that's why I lived in 4 different cities. I lived in 4 different cities. So for me, and so it's like we can't find no talent who lived in 4 different cities. Well, they don't have to live in 4 different cities, but you're stuck on old criteria.
Yeah.
So you got to look at current criteria, look at the available workforce. And the biggest piece of work now is pipeline work. When things are underrepresented, you gotta go look for it earlier and prepare it. I majored in economics and sociology, and I changed to sociology like junior year. But you can't change the engineering in junior year. We got to prepare people early to be an engineer to kind of get them ready for that type of role.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it has to be realistic, and it is okay to do, but do it the right way. And we can help you. Do that the right way. Yeah.
I'm gonna prioritize this next one because it was from our friend who asked the B Corp question that we couldn't answer, and I think this is a nice way to clarify for us. Like, okay, we're gonna try again. This person says, we hire people who have the best skills to fill the job, and we notice that candidates for director and higher level jobs are not being filled with diverse people. How can we get more diversity, but yet keep our goal of getting the most qualified person for the job intact in the organization? I think you kind of just touched on that, but maybe just clarify for that particular question too.
Yeah, the way we address that is a great question. We have something called the must-wants process. So the must box says, here's the requirement for the job. And then the want box says, here's the additional things that add value. And so in most historical scenarios, what comes out of the want box is comfort and fit. So you ever heard, I got a good gut feel about that guy. I'm like, well, what does gut feel? I don't know, but he got it.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? So, and what ends up taking place, we'll find ourselves putting higher standards on those who are different. I was working with one client. They said, Doug, you have any minority engineers from Northwestern? I'm like, well, where'd you go to school? They went to like Boo Boo State, but they wanted the African Americans to come from Northwestern. So we end up putting higher standards just to make sure they're qualified in line with somebody who may not even have their standards. You should never lower qualifications, but you got to realistically look at qualifications. And a lot of that is a mindset versus a reality.
Yeah, and acknowledging that, you know, we might have unconscious bias towards others as well, right? And you know, I know
we got to keep the word light out, Tony. We got them. We're human. We're human, right?
Yeah.
We're human.
Yeah.
And so how do we manage that? Good deal.
Very
we
good.
couldn't handle B Corp. Hopefully we help you there, buddy.
Yeah. Yeah, hopefully. Otherwise you can still follow up, certainly. We'd be happy to answer. Great. Well, we're at time here. Tracy, do you want to close us out here and wrap up?
Yes. So just a couple closing remarks here. So first, thank you so much to Doug and Tony. This really was such good content, and having both of you on share your expertise is really amazing. So thanks again. And thanks everyone who joined today. You had some great questions. I know that there's a lot of virtual events out there, so we really appreciate you taking the time to tune in. Just a couple of closing remarks. A couple people did ask, yes, we did record this. So I will send an email out with the link to the recording in case you want to share it with a coworker or listen to it again. In that point, you also have my contact information. So if you want to reach out to me, even though you cannot see me, I promise you I am a real person. So if you email Tracy and Alexei, I will respond to you and I can forward your email to the best person who can answer your question. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and conclude our session. Thank you again for joining, and I hope you all have a great day. Thank you.
Pleasure. Great work with you, Tony. All right, bud.
Thanks, Doug.
Bye.
Bye-bye.